special today, and I know there'll be a few more people coming in. Gabe Lopez is our guest, and he is going to pop into the 11 o'clock service at some point early in the service. So we need to get him out of here by, say, about 11:10-ish, so that after the hymns, Gina wants to introduce him to the congregation. So we're so glad to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to read a little bio and just embarrass you about a few things, probably. But Gabe Lopez is a native of Philadelphia, born to Guatemalan immigrant parents and shaped by the vibrant communities of the city. After earning his Bachelor of Arts in Bible and Theology from Malone University and his Master of Divinity from Duke University, he began ministry as an associate pastor at a multicultural church in Henderson, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years, his journey has been grounded in deep commitment to working alongside immigrants and serving marginalized communities. Most recently, he served as one of the pastors at the First United Methodist Church of Germantown in Philadelphia. And he now serves, I love this title that he has, he is the Director of Social Impact and Belonging. Wonderful title for both the Eastern Pennsylvania and Greater New Jersey conferences of our denomination. So we thank you so much for welcoming me today.
Buenos dias.
Buenos dias.
Good morning, good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you this morning. It's good to be among people who deeply care about equity and justice in our church. So, when I was asked to speak, I thought about what it means to live as a Latino in the United States. So I want to share a bit about the history, ethnically, culturally, and of course theologically. And I thought you can't really separate those three things in my experience. Because for so many of us, identity, culture, and faith aren't distinct boxes. They're overlapping, they're fluid, sometimes messy. So that's what I want to share with you today, what it means to believe and live in between worlds. So I want to begin with a theological lens, move into the complexity of identities, what it means to be Latino, Latina, Latine, Latinx, and what all these different endings mean in that word, and what it means for the church, and then close with how this connects to immigration. And I'll be sure to watch my time as well. Okay. So I want to start off by sharing something that I once read in seminary, written by theologian Michelle Gonzalez Maldonado, in her essay, Who We Are, Latino Constructive Anthropology. So she writes that if theology is to be faithful, it must not only begin with God, but also with anthropology. It must begin with what it means to be human. And she builds on theologian Karl Rahner's idea that every act of theology at its core is an act of self-understanding. She applies this to the Latino experience. And the question for Gonzalez isn't only who is God, but also who are we? Who are we as God's people in the complexity of our racial, cultural, and historic reality? And as I thought about Latinos in the United States, the question of who we are has often been tied to survival. Who are we when our language is seen as foreign? Who are we when our colors don't necessarily fit clean categories? Who are we when our histories are written by others? So I want to introduce the first concept tonight, this morning, today. And it's mestizaje. Mestizaje, mulatez, infantilismo as well. We'll talk about it a little later. Raise your hand if you've heard the term mestizaje. Anyone? Okay. So mestizaje historically refers to the mixture of different races when the social construct of race was coming to the Western world in the Americas. And mestizaje, specifically the word mestizo, refers to the mixture of Spanish European and Amerindian, producing what the colonial powers called mestizos. Mulatez refers to the offspring of the Spanish European and Africans, producing mulattos. And then the mixture of African and indigenous descent, referred to as Sambos, which I don't have up there. But this language comes from the Spanish caste system, a racial hierarchy created to maintain colonial control. And I want to share it with you before we go there. Here is the Spanish caste system. It's kind of difficult to see here, but if you look closely, you'll see, and this was categorization, right? The closer you were to being lighter skinned, the more power. The closer you were to being darker skinned, the closer to servitude. And if you see here, up here, you have the Spanish European mixing with the indigenous person, creating a mestizo under this caste system. And I mentioned to you mulattoes, which is the Spanish European mixing with someone of African descent, creating mulattoes. And what's interesting about this system is that there's actually a way, if you notice here, to move back up on the hierarchy, depending on who the person is procreating with. It's more complex than what the U.S. caste system we know today, in 1/8 rule in the United States. So maybe I'll share this with you later so you can see it.
No, if you ever go to Monterrey, Mexico, in the museum there are full-size paintings of those.
Yes, yeah, and so.
In fact, that might come from Monterey.
Yeah, it might, yeah, so this is, as you know, most of Latin America was colonized by the Spanish, with the exception of a few countries like Brazil and Portuguese. So, just to share with you here, before we get to that, I want to just mention something, is that this caste system categorized people by blood and by worth. Lighter skin closer to power, darker skin closer to servitude. And the irony and tragedy is that what we now celebrate as diverse and vibrant in Latin America was somewhat born through colonial violence. So-called mixing was rarely mutual. It was a result of conquest, of sexual abuse, of enslavement. So when we speak of mestizaje, we must do so truthfully. Our hybridity is not a romantic symbol. It's a wound, sometimes can be seen as that way as well. It's a story of survival written on the bodies of our ancestors. So as theologian Benjamin Valentin puts it, these encounters were not abstract, they were often violent, and identities were literally forced into being. So just want to share with you here, as you look at this, this is from the Instituto de Cultura Puertorriqueña, which is the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture. And what you see in this is the racial mixture that I'm referring to, because you might have heard that Hispanic Latino is not a race, it's an ethnicity, right? And so this is where it becomes very difficult to check off in the United States, what is your race, right? When I'm asked that question, and here's why. Because in Latin America, it's a mixture of many races. And you see here, you see a ship coming in, right, representing the European, came to the Americas. And what's interesting is that how you see a Spanish European here, you see an indigenous person here, you see someone of African descent here. What's interesting is what they're holding, right? Because I think this accurately, in a more simplistic way, describes the racial mixture in Latin America. The Spanish European here is holding, what do you think this is here?
Treasure box? Gold?
It's a book.
It's a book, okay. Good at reading.
The Bible. He's holding the Bible here. And you have the indigenous person, you can't really see what they have there, but it's vegetables, fruit of the land. And you have the person of African descent holding, see what that is? Drums and a machete. You know, and so this right here is in the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture, just kind of showing, you know, Spanish European, and this they're portrayed as bringing the Bible, Christianity, which of course that's subject for another day, but much of Christianity is what justified, you know, genocide and enslavement. So yeah, let's go on to the next one. So So I shared about the caste system. Now I want to share with you how this is pertinent to my life, and what theologians like Gabriel wrote this quotation here. I'll read in a second. Reinterpreted mestizaje not only as racial mixture, but also as cultural hybridity. Elizondo, often called the father of U.S. Latino theology, described mestizaje as a theological key, a way of understanding God's revelation in between spaces of human existence. So, someone mind reading this?
Their identity was precisely in their non-identity. There was no place where they truly belonged, felt at home. Trying to live two or more distinct souls, one Western, the other native, one powerful, the other crushed, one oppressor, the other oppressed, one white, the other brown. Virgilio Elizondo.
Thank you. He said that Latinas live in between two worlds. One Western, the other native, one powerful, the other crushed. So for Elizondo, our identities are precisely in our non-identity. We are people of no single home, living between languages, two histories, realities, never belonging in both, but never fully belonging in either one. And yet Elizondo said that's exactly where God meets us, in that tension, in the in-betweenness. So I want to share now some personal stories that, living between two worlds comes with enormous pressure. In the United States, the temptation is always to assimilate, right?
So I just have a quick question for you. Are you talking about the Latino experience in the United States or the
Yes.
Latino experience in their own country?
In the United
Because
States.
those are completely
In the
different.
United States.
Okay.
I'm going to get to immigration later. That, yeah. Sorry, what was that? In the United States, the temptation is to assimilate, right? To shed what makes us different so that we can belong. To speak English without an accent. To neglect the rhythm of our music, the smell of our food, the complexity of our roots. To downplay our racial roots of indigeneity or African ancestry. Because assimilation promises safety, but it demands cultural silence. And I think about this often when I remember my own upbringing, and I grew up what I like to refer to as a mini Guatemala, right, in my household. At home, everything was in Spanish. Univision, Telemundo was on the TV. Tortillas were on the stove. Eating things like frijoles negros, arroz, plátanos. I know it's almost lunchtime, so I don't want to mention it. And my parents' faith were all wrapped up in that world of mine. But outside my front door, everything changed. Language, spoke English at school, ate burgers, pizza. I went to a Catholic school where most of us were either Latino or African American, and the nuns were Irish. And while loving and caring, the message was clear: it was English only. And I had to go to ESL classes when I first arrived to school. And there's a kind of quiet violence in being told that your mother tongue is not really welcomed or accepted. And that's why linguistic mestizaje, which is is a mixture of Spanish, English, and I have here Spanish as resistance. I want you to speak English, get out. Which things that I often heard as a child. And then I want to introduce the term Spanglish. Have you heard the term Spanglish? Which is like a mixture of Spanish and English. I also want to share with you a book that really helped me in seminary. And if you want to learn more about this, it's written by Gloria Ansaldúa, and it's known as Borderlands, La Frontera. And I just want to quote her when she says she says, if you want to be American, this is her telling her experience in school. And a teacher saying this to her, if you want to be American, speak American. If you don't like it, go back to Mexico where you belong. And she writes this, she's talking about her experience growing up near the US-Mexico border. She writes, my tongue will not be tamed. So as I read these types of stories, I resonated with that because as I thought of my own experience as a child, as a youth, and then of course this pressure to And what's really sad is that I notice this in my siblings, my younger siblings, I have very young siblings, or my nieces and nephews, the temptation to just want to speak English in their schools and at home as well. So I notice sometimes, my parents or my aunt and uncle will speak to one of them in Spanish and they'll reply in English. And I gently encourage them and say, hey, keep practicing your Spanish. It's one of the greatest blessings that I have to be bilingual. So what's liberating about mestizaje? Well, Elizondo offers something bold. He says that Jesus himself was like a mestizo in the cultural sense. He argues that Jesus was born in Galilee, he grew up in a place of mixed cultures, Jewish, Greek, Roman, a borderland of its own, never fully accepted by the religious elite of Jerusalem, nor did he fully belong to the Gentile world. He lived, as Elizondo puts it, in the tension of belonging and rejection. So that's why he could identify with those who lived on the margins, because he was one of them. So to call Jesus a mestizo is to say God knows what it's like not to belong in the homogeneous groups. God knows the pain of being questioned, categorized, misunderstood. And that's what's liberating about it. That Christ takes on our own in-betweenness. Then our fragmentation is not a curse, it's a place of divine encounter. So, as we're talking about the middle, what it means to live in this fluid middle space, I want to share another term here. And we're going to get to immigration because I know that's what you want to hear about as well. But it's the Nahuatl word, meaning nepantla, which literally means in the middle. Someone mind reading this for us?
Nepantla prompts you to shift into a new perception of yourself and of the world. Nothing is fixed. The pulse of existence, the heart of the universe is fluid identity. Like a river, is always changing, always in transition, always in Nepantla. Gloria Ansaldia.
Ansaldua, yes, thank you. So I'm just going to have some images in the background to better share what Ansaldua is referring to here. And she describes this as this liminal space where identities overlap, where you're neither here nor there, but somehow both. Nepantla is a space of tension and possibility. It's uncomfortable, but it's creative. And it's, in a way, it's where all of us live at some point, right? Between the world as it is and the world as it should be. So for Latinas, Nepantla is where theology happens. It's where we wrestle with God about who we are and how to love in a world that doesn't necessarily always love us back. It's where I spent most of my life, between Guatemala and the US, between Spanish and English, between Catholic and Protestant, between hope and heartbreak. And maybe that's what makes this theology so necessary. It reminds us that the gospel was never meant to live in purity or in certainty. It was meant to live in the crossings, in the intersections, in betweens. It's a theology that reminds us to live in grace and in-betweens. It's theology that resists binaries, not white nor brown, nor colonizer nor colonized, but together, both together in tension. And that's profoundly good news from my perspective, because it tells us that holiness does not require uniformity. All right, so how are we doing on time? 10:40, because I want to make sure we have time for questions. I'm gonna go ahead and skip some of this. Actually, are there any questions before I move on?
I was going to say that reality you're describing also occurs in Latin America. I mean, I think of like all the indigenous peoples that live side by side with the predominantly Spanish culture in many of the countries in Latin America. I'm thinking of the Mayan speakers in the Yucatan Peninsula, and the Nahuatl speaking people in the Sierra of Mexico. So it's not just an experience that happens here, it happens everywhere.
Yeah, of course. That's right. I mean, it's like I said, it's in between all these spaces.
So we're almost all in between, right?
Yeah, that's right. So let me see where I should pick up here. So the question, I think, for everyone here is how do we make room for those who live in this middle Nepantla space in between languages, in between identities, in between safety and fear. Because as I think about immigrants or immigrant siblings, that's their reality, especially nowadays, right? So, share this, or this is supposed to be early, this is great. At least on the rights. Just pointing, you're not Jewish enough, you're not Roman enough. And this is just some more Latino, Latin American theology. El Dios que se hizo carne is the God who was made flesh. But the difference between carne and flesh, I think there's, they connote different words. Carne being the Spanish word for flesh. In Latin America, and in parts like Mexico and other places, well, there's a saying that, you are my carnal, tú eres mi carnal, you are my carnal, which means you are my flesh. In other words, we may not be blood, but we are of the same thing. It's a thing of belonging, right? We're like brothers, we're like sisters, we're like siblings. So what does it mean that Jesus became carne? It's God's ultimate solidarity with humanity. Okay, so I want to turn now to immigration. Any questions before we? Okay. So in the past year, we've seen renewed fear among immigrant communities across our region. Since the rescinding of the sensitive locations memorandum, churches are no longer guaranteed as sanctuary spaces. And as we know, as you've seen in the news, ICE has conducted raids all throughout the country pretty much, including here, New Jersey and Philadelphia. Families have been separated, but once again, the church has responded. I've witnessed congregations providing food and basic necessities for undocumented families who are too afraid to leave their homes. On Mondays, actually, this is something I can share with you. Mondays at 11 a.m., there's a group of clergy that meet outside of the ICE office in Center City, Philadelphia. Members participating with the New Sanctuary Movement and Greater New Jersey's own Hope Center, First Friends of New Jersey. Are you familiar with that organization?
No.
They're a Hope Center that accompanies people to court hearings or visits those in detention centers. So, it's an act of this in-between grace, right? Of standing between fear and faith, exclusion and embrace. And I think the church, I'm really proud to be a church that really stands through the social principles and through what the conference has shared with us through the Immigration Rapid Response Team. So immigration is not just about borders, it's a question of belonging, right? It's about how we understand what it means to be human in God's image. The scriptures say, you shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in Egypt. It's not a suggestion, it's a reminder of our own story. So, in some ways, we are all descendants of those who crossed borders. Abraham leading Moses leading an Exodus, Ruth crossing into Bethlehem following Naomi, Mary and Joseph fleeing to Egypt with the infant Jesus. Even the incarnation itself, this the enfleshment of God becoming flesh. It's the ultimate act of crossing a border between divine and dust. So when the church stands with immigrants, it's not just doing charity, I think it's imitating God in that sense. And so, I just want to share some images here. These are actually images of when I was in seminary, which is about 10 years ago now, Duke University. We took these trips to the US-Mexico border. And what you'll notice is that on this side, the border wall actually extends. This is Tijuana and San Diego. The border wall actually extends out into the ocean, so people don't try to swim across. And what you notice here is that this is the border between the U.S. side and the Mexico side and the other side, Tijuana. And something that caught my eye as we were driving around is this image right here. It says, "También de este lado hay sueños." And what that means is, also on this side, there are dreams. Um, So something that was really powerful about our trip is that on Sunday morning, we went to this border, the border that you just saw, and we actually had communion here, you know, with people on both sides. At that time, people were allowed to come up that close to each other, to be on both sides. It's not allowed anymore, but we would have communion as a way of saying, you know, these walls won't separate us. This image right here is actually taken from La Casa del Migrante, the migrant house in Tijuana, Mexico, and it just really stood out to me to see, you know, this image of the cross, and to see the campesinos, the farm workers, as well as the priest, the religious worker, and the family, in a place like a migrant house. It's a place where people would come to either if they're traveling north to try to get into the United States, or if they've been recently deported, they would go to the migrant house in Tijuana. So I invite you to think about theology of accompaniment as we think about our immigrant siblings walking with others. I think is the most faithful form of advocacy. To walk, to march, to pray, not just with our words, but with our bodies. And so I want to end with this. That was the last slide. As you mentioned, every one of us lives in some kind of in-between, some kind of borderland. Maybe not between countries, but between sometimes emotional feelings, right? Sometimes between certainty and doubt, between privilege and pain, between the life we have and the one we hope for. As I mentioned, the good news is that God lives there too.
Amen.
Our mestizaje, this mixture, our contradictions don't separate us from God. It reveals God's creativity. Our nepantla, our middleness, our in-betweenness doesn't make us lost. It makes us real, it makes us visible. And when we see that, when we live from that place, we begin to welcome others. We begin to really have this openness, not out of pity, but out of this desire for kinship. Because ultimately the gospel is not about uniformity or purity, it's about presence. It's not about sameness, it's about solidarity. So whether we're talking about racial identity, cultural heritage, or immigration, the call is the same. To cross borders for the sake of love, to live in the middle with grace, and to see God in the places where everyone else forgets to look. Thank you. Are there any questions, comments? Anything?
I missed your introduction, guys, getting coffee. What do you do?
Okay. Thank you. So I work with Eastern Pennsylvania and Greater New Jersey Annual Conference.
Okay.
You know, Director of Social Impact and Belonging.
Social impact and belonging.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
And does that encompass more than just,
It does, yes.
Hispanic and interracial issues and things like that? Or
It
how would you
does.
characterize your?
It does,
function?
yes. So, beyond immigration, for example, today, right after this, there's a Dismantling Racism workshop that's been happening all weekend.
Oh, what kind of workshop?
A Dismantling Racism
Oh,
workshop.
dismantling racism.
Yes. Working with now the inclusion of our LGBTQ plus siblings as well in both conferences.
Okay.
Working with, of course, all the racial ethnic caucuses and plans for conferences, including BMCR, Strengthening the Black Church, Conan, COSRO.
Wow.
And so, yeah,
Good
it
job.
encompasses a lot, it does, yeah. And I just started in this role
Cool.
in July, so I'm still kind of.
Who was doing the job before you?
There was no role.
No? This is a new job?
This is a new position.
Oh,
yes.
cool.
So Reverend Sean Lee was the associate superintendent here. He's now the assistant to the bishop. But he was doing the Journey of Hope and Wholeness, which is anti-racist work. But now they've kind of brought it all together for both.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia.
Born and raised in Philadelphia.
Cool.
Temple Hospital.
about the conference that you went to in Baltimore?
Oh, yes, yes. So a couple weeks ago, I went to and this is actually sponsored as well through the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference. The General Board of Church and Society held a national training for organizing and advocacy. And this was led by organizers throughout the country. There were 4 leaders who really trained us on how to organize well, and all the different forms of organizing, and what's efficient, what's not so efficient. And they did it through the power of storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And they started with what is your story? The story of self. Right? How do we tell our stories well? Like sharing on Philadelphia, sharing on the childhood of Guatemalan immigrants. Then they asked the question, what's the story of us? How are we intertwined in this work? And then finally moving to the story of now.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it important? Why is this relevant? And so it was through the power of storytelling that they talked to us about organizing. And something else I really struck me at this organizing event is they asked us, they showed us 5 ways of being present, right? Some of them I don't remember off the top of my head are advocacy, protesting. There were a few more, and then the other one was organizing. And they asked us, what is your go-to? What do you default to? And I immediately thought, well, I go to advocacy because I always want to ask, who can we get a professional here? Can we get the attorney to talk to us about immigration? How do we, and advocating in that way. But what they shared was that organizing is not just advocacy or protest. It also is demanding something. And so that's something that had me thinking, as we try to organize for immigration justice, we try to organize for racial justice. What is our request? What is our demand in this work? And so it was a really good training. It was really helpful, and actually someone from Greater New Jersey went as well, Reverend Young Conkley. You may or may not have heard of him. Yes.
I just wanted to mention, as an immigrant, I just wanted to say I understand and relate to everything you've said and support, because I'm from Nigeria originally, and after some time, after living here in over 20 years, it seems as if you don't have any particular place that's yours. Because when you're here, you're seen as, you're from Nigeria, even though this is your home. You've adopted the culture and everything. But when you go to Nigeria, they see you as an American. and so it's like, even my own family see me differently.
Yes.
As, and then when I come here, people see me as Nigerian, even the language too. And, so after a while, building, just finding ways to belong and how to adapt to these different changes, and I just figured, well, I guess it might be best for me to just bring the best from Nigeria to the US and bring the best of the US to Nigeria, and maybe that's my role, and just how to figure it and fit in. But it makes complete sense, and it's a struggle, but at the same time, it's such a blessing. And I wish I'd held more to my language more, because now when I speak it, they say I'm butchering the language. So, because that's what makes you unique as a human being, like you were saying, what makes you human, being able to speak different languages and have these unique abilities is an identity to who you are. Your brain loves it, your body loves it, it's who you are. It doesn't mean it's bad or it's not. So it's what makes everything beautiful, and that's part of why I love America. I love America. There's hardly nowhere else that you see the big combination of different people from different parts of the world.
Yes.
And I think it's more for celebration and loving those different parts than isolation or not feeling like you belong.
Thank you for sharing. That's really
No, because
see another thing, and a lot of times when people are coming here to establish a new life, we've worked for years with international students and now international people, and often in that in-betweenness, when they are young people and they marry or make families, they do it with another immigrant, not necessarily from their own culture. But I think it's because they understand that being in between and feel comfortable.
Right.
So I had a lot of friends like that end up still marrying cross-culturally, but here, and then building a new world, and then their children are probably gonna be more like you are, because they're now the children of immigrants. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting, because they know the difficulties that Alessi is experiencing, or has experienced, and they find someone else who understands that
Right.
often.
Right, because that experience can be a very lonely one.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
yes.
What are your thoughts on how a local church like ours might become more like involved and more like Jesus in our interactions and advocacy for the immigrants in our communities?
Well, it's continuing to do what you're doing here, you know, in spaces like these, in racial, social justice, equity. Yeah, and then just getting precisely that storytelling, you know, hearing people's stories, befriending our neighbors, our immigrant siblings. And you know, at the organizing level, it's joining efforts like the ones that are already out there. Coming to Center City on 11 a.m. on Mondays. You know, donating to the ILJ, the Immigration Law and Justice Network. Reaching out to New Sanctuary Movement as well. First Friends of New Jersey, New York, our GNJ Hope Center. There are plenty of nonprofits and organizations already doing the work out there. The fact of the matter is that this government, the administration, as we know now, is doing some things that are very unprecedented, you know, including removing the memorandum of sensitive locations, right? And so, and of course, detaining, I mean, you may have seen videos of people being detained right after their court hearings.
Yes.
And, you know, they're leaving their immigration hearing and there's ICE outside. So just lots of things that we've never seen before, so it is difficult to resist and fight back when things are being done the way they are, but that doesn't mean that we stay silent. Yes.
If we sign up over there, would we be able to get all the information you're talking about with different
Sure.
nonprofits, local nonprofits and
Yes, I
things?
can send- I can
And
send
the
you.
information about on Mondays where we could help, that kind of
Yeah,
thing? Okay.
absolutely.
I just wanna mention, I get an email, I think it's the newsletter from the conference.
Yes.
And they have a lot of, like, just recently they had they sent out some where you could send a letter to your congressman or whatever it was,
Mhm.
just sign your name and pop it out. So they have options as
Yes.
well for, with something to do with immigration.
Right, if you have the newsletter, and on the websites too, there's a website, GNJ, if you just type in Standing in Solidarity, GNJ, UMC, on Google, you'll find that website of all the resources and how you can join our efforts.
I just have a question about if you have a hearing and you are it's highly likely you're gonna get arrested when you step outside the door. Are people being advised at all to not go to their hearings? Because that's the tension I feel like. Should you
Yes.
just, as an advocate, should you say, look, we're gonna protect you, but protecting you means you're gonna have to miss your hearing, and what happens to people when they miss their hearings?
Well, if you miss your hearing, you're automatically, there's a deportation
Order?
order to, yeah. So that's the tension, right? You
Mhm.
show up, you try to do the right thing,
Mhm.
you show up, but then, get detained, right after. So it's, yeah,
So are
it's
people
a
doing
challenge.
it, are they going underground at that point, do you know?
I don't know. Yeah, I think it's probably case by case and in conversation with attorneys.
So is ILG Delaware Valley still working? Because we used to have
Yeah.
immigration clinics, and I used to help out at those down in Bridgeton and some of the other
Right.
things, but we stopped because they got backlogged,
Yes,
so many cases.
yeah.
Are they still going?
So, yes, so it used to be called JFON, right?
It was
Justice for Our
JFON,
Neighbors.
Justice for Our
Now
Neighbors, yes.
Now it's IOJ.
TV.
Yeah, so there's an immigration rapid response team now,
Okay.
led by Reverend Mark Salvacion.
Okay.
He is an attorney.
So they're kind of morphed into that.
Yes, for
Okay.
Eastern Pennsylvania, Green, New Jersey, but the ILJ network as, in the country is still functioning.
Oh, it is, okay, okay. But just the Philadelphia area, New Jersey area has kind of morphed into.
Yes, we have the immigration rapid response team.
Mhm.
And you can find more information on the G&J website.
Okay, okay. And are you familiar with the group New Labor in New Jersey? It's a group I work with in the labor movement, and they basically do a lot of rapid response kind of thing, you know.
Okay, gotcha.
You know, they're out of New Brunswick,
Yes.
but they're following ICE everywhere.
Oh, wow.
So if you wanna be on.
Yeah, oh, wow. Yeah, and as you mentioned that, if you ever do need some assistance, you know, please reach out to the Immigration Rapid Response Team. There is a retainer for attorneys, you know,
That's
the
good to know.
conference, yeah, conference has, so that is available.
But they're not doing immigration clinics anymore as far as,
No,
yeah.
not doing immigration. Any other questions, comments?
Well, thank you so much, Gabe.
Thank you.
If you wanna sign up for more information, do that, and then, I will ask Katie to send information to me, and I will make sure you get it. So, please sign up if you'd like to. He is invited to the 11 o'clock service, so we need to get him over there so that Gina can introduce him to the congregation over there. But again, many, many thanks.
Yeah, thank you.